What's up, buddy? Looking for music, but if you're here for sex, swipe left. Alright, what's up, dude?
Hi. Does my microphone work correctly? Is it AIDS? Is it
It's acceptable. What did you want to talk about?
Hey, buddy. I wanted to talk about mostly $15 minimum wage.
Oh, boy.
Because yeah, I know arguing with little children is kind of autistic, especially about economics.
Whoa, dude, damn, you don't have to savage yourself like that. We're just starting.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
Picklmancer is the
I'm
biggest
beating you to the
weeb
punch,
one,
I guess.
TBH.
Alright, well, what's up, buddy?
Hey, so to start off the debate,
Whoa,
let's just
discussion.
discussion, yeah, yeah. So to start off, my position is that a $15 minimum wage across the U.S. is probably a good idea, in my opinion. And I know I've listened to your position before. I'm kind of a big fan of you, and this is one of the few positions I disagree with you on. So I'd imagine your
Asians
opinion
are better
is,
than whites.
it's
That's
a
why
bad
Lily is
idea.
better than you.
Let the market figure out what the appropriate wage should be for the minimum wage, and that minimum wage in and of itself might be a bad idea. Is that a good?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
So my
So
big question for you, I guess, is like, let's say you've got a job, and the finances have figured everything out, that job is worth about $8 an hour, and you want to pay them $15 an hour. Where do you get the extra money from?
um, I'm not. Can you explain a little? I'm sorry.
So, like, let's say that I run a restaurant, okay? And as part of my overhead, I've got, the money that I need to make. I've got the overhead, things that I need to pay for. I need to pay, utilities to keep the lights and the gas and everything on. I need to pay rent to keep my property working. Let's say now that I have my labor figured in, which they do. Labor is figured in as a cost of doing business. Let's say that you come and you say, okay, well, now that labor is going to be double the price. Where does that extra money come from? How does the business pay for that labor?
Okay. So yeah. I'm from everything that I've seen. If you increase your minimum wage, especially to a pretty big number, that it would be like $8 jump from 7.25 to $15 an hour. From what I've seen, about 42% of the population, the workforce, would be impacted by this wage increase. So so now that people are making around 30,000 a year, they're getting a lot more money. And considering these people, poor people spend their money, a lot because, they're poor and they have to spend money.
Hey, buddy, thanks
So
for the
consumer
entertainment
spending
over the
increases a
past
lot
7 big
since,
ones.
their wages increase. Now they have more money to spend on more goods. So now like this, let's just say that, this small business that this example you're coming out with, you have like your shop, and then you have like your employees, but now that you're paying them more, you're going to run out of business soon. So you need to sell your goods. And now that more people are working more jobs that give them more money, they now have a higher consumer spending to spend at your shop if what you're selling is actually profitable, or is actually best for the customer, I
Okay, so
guess.
there's kind of two different things going on here. Is one, if prices have to increase for everybody to give some people a bump in wage, do we really gain a lot there? I'm not sure if that's necessarily true or not, right? Because you're saying that, well, at least these people will be making more money so they can pay for things that are more expensive, was the first part. And then kind of like secondly, oh fuck, I totally just forgot the second point. We'll focus on the first one.
Okay, so from everything that I've seen that
Dude, I
isn't from
donated
like a
$1
conservative
with a
think
cute
tank.
message into
Oh
it
shit,
that
hold on,
says
I'm sorry,
skip
one second.
Okay, sorry.
It actually felt really bad, and the chat rolled at me like actually really bad. Still banned you years ago. I love you, buddy. I already unbanned you, dude. I unbanned you in chat. Did you not see it? Or is it in Twitch chat? Okay, I unbanned you in both chats, I guess. Okay, I'm sorry. Keep going.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we were talking about price increase. So from every study that I've seen that isn't from like like a conservative think tank or like Breitbart tier aides, you know, if you increase the minimum wage, prices will increase. Some studies say that a Big Mac would be like 16 more cents, something around there.
In the dark.
The cost of goods will increase, but not enough to where it's like a gigantic portion, or it's enough to like negate the entire wage increase altogether. Um, yeah, I'm sorry that I sound like so shaky. I'm kind of nervous.
No, it's okay.
Being up in front of, and you're kind of like my, I don't want to say idol. That sounds really cringy, but you're kind of like a guy that I look up to, I
Yeah, no,
guess.
that's fine. So what you're talking about, I've heard this before. So I used to kind of be a shift lead at a McDonald's, right? In fast food, they take that very seriously, right? So the idea would be, I think at McDonald's, if there are any managers here right now, you would know more than I. Don't you try to keep labor at around 20%, like 15 to 20%? I think is usually the goal. It might be a little more, it might be a little less, or it might vary from region to region as well, right? So if your labor were to double in cost, you wouldn't necessarily have to double the cost of good to compensate for that. You would just have to increase it a little bit, right, in order to compensate for that extra bump in labor, because labor doesn't compromise 100% of your final cost to deliver to the customer, or whatever, right? So here's another thing to think about as well. Let's say that you have a job. Let's say that you have a job where, hold on. Oh yeah. Okay. Let's say that you have a job that costs $8 an hour to pay somebody to do, but if you automate it, that cost would end up coming out at like $14 an hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
By raising the minimum wage up to such a high number, aren't you encouraging people to just kind of like look quicker towards these forms of automation?
I mean, I do think that automation is inevitable, but I don't think that we're close to being in like a fully automated world, where most of our stuff, I might be alive during that time, but I don't think that it's in like the, like next few years kind of thing. So, the thing with that is, I'm not entirely sure. I feel like once we reach the point where automation is like a really big thing,
So I think automation is a really big thing. I went to a noodle place in California, and the ordering was actually all done like on a computer. You walked in and you pushed the buttons to order it. How cool is that? That's kind of just a little anecdote. I don't know how big fast food is, but like automation has taken over manufacturing, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
automation has
minimum
destroyed
wage.
manufacturing in every fucking, even in China. Like automation has
Yeah,
annihilated manufacturing. So
Yeah, I know.
yeah.
And like a wage increase there wouldn't increase anything. It should, they already, that was a really big paying job, and then it died. So, okay, yeah, right. So when automation, I mean, it kind of does look like we already are coming closer to automation, but I don't think we're going to be in like a bigger, I don't think we would have to overhaul to like an entirely new system quite yet. And maybe automation is a good thing or it's a bad. That's kind of a different conversation, but it's also interesting.
So something that you might want to consider. So I mean at this point, like I understand your ideas and I think you understand my ideas. We're kind of floating in like the realm of theory. So I guess and I understand if you don't have this offhand, but like have you read any literature that supports like any kind of experimental economics that supports that raising the minimum wage by a significant amount will actually have a beneficial impact on the lowest workers that are earning that wage?
I mean, considering it would be, $15 an hour across the entire U.S., I don't think I've seen I haven't seen any like studies that do like that kind of experiment. God, I'm sorry. Do you have any studies that say that have any experiments like that or?
Yeah, actually, I have a meta-analysis. Here, we can read it on stream if you want. Here you go. Because this is kind of where, at this point, I kind of have to pull into empirical data, because we can always argue theoreticals, but I don't have the college background to do it. But, I mean, empirical data is empirical data, and I'll just start. I'm going to start reading through some of this, okay? I skimmed this a long time ago. I didn't read the whole thing, so it might support you, but I don't think it did. But I'm going to start reading through, okay?
Okay.
All right. The minimum wage has gained momentum among policymakers as a way to alleviate rising wage and income inequality. Much of the debate over this policy centers on whether raising the minimum wage could cause job loss, as well as the potential magnitude of those losses. Recent research shows conflicting evidence on both sides of the issue. In general, the evidence suggests that it is appropriate to weigh the cost of potential job losses from a higher minimum wage against the benefits of wage increases for other workers. It is easy to be confused. Okay, real fast. So breaking down that first statement, it seems like a higher minimum wage will benefit some people at the higher end of the spectrum, but it sounds like the people at the bottom are going to be impacted the most, right?
I mean, I don't doubt that there probably will be a few jobs lost. I think it would be kind of foolish to say, if we increase the minimum wage over like 4 years, let's say, that there will be zero job loss. Like, I think that's a little bit silly. Obviously, there will be some, but I don't think there will be like a massive. We're at like like 4 or 5% right now.
So right now, unemployment in the United States is actually very, very, very good, but underemployment is an issue where there are a lot of people that consider themselves not having adequate work available to them, even though they have work available to them. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you want to keep reading or?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is easy to be confused about what effects minimum wage have on jobs for low-skilled workers. Researchers offer conflicting evidence on whether or not raising the minimum wage means fewer jobs for those workers. Some recent studies even suggest overall employment could be harmed. This letter sheds light on the range of estimates and the different approaches in the research that might explain some of the conflicting results. It also presents some mid-range estimates of the aggregate employment effects from recent minimum wage increases based on the research literature. We can skip the theory since I understand the theory fairly well. I think you do as well, or we've kind of talked about it. So recent research on employment effect, here, we'll skim this real quick. The standard model of competitive labor markets predicts that a higher minimum wage will lead to job loss among low-skilled workers. We've talked about this. The labor market is more complicated, right? We know this, as you were saying, if consumer spending increases, that could offset losses from a business and compensate them for having to pay more labor. Right, we know that, right? In some alternative labor market models, worker mobility is limited. Individual employers therefore have some discretion in setting wages, right? This is kind of arguing that the minimum wage could be set higher, but employers kind of fuck employees, I guess, because they don't have the ability to move to a different job. But yeah, okay, so recent research, so getting into the empirical numbers, recent research on employment effects of minimum wages. The earliest studies of the unemployment effects of minimum wages used only national variation in the U.S. minimum wage. They found elasticities between -0.1 and -0.3 for teens aged 16 through 19, and between -0.1 and -0.2 for young adults ages 16 to 24. An elasticity of -0.1 for teens, for example, means that a 10% increase in the minimum wage reduces teen employment by 1%. Newer research used data from an increasing number of states raising their minimum wages above the federal minimum. I'm sorry, hold on one second.
How long?
Nice, ma'am. Until Destiny's automated. Okay. The across-state variation allowed comparisons of changes in youth employment between states that did and did not raise their minimum wage. This made it easier to distinguish the effects of minimum wage from those of business cycles and other influences of aggregate low-skill employment. An extensive survey by Newmark and Washer concluded that nearly 2/3 of the more than 100 newer minimum wage studies and 85% of the most convincing ones found consistent evidence of job loss effects on low-skilled workers. Research since 2007, however, has reported conflicted findings. Some studies use meta-analysis, averaging across a set of studies to draw conclusions. For example, Dokiologus and Stanley report an average elasticity across studies of -0.19, consistent with earlier conclusions, but argue that the true effect is closer to zero. They suggest that the biases of authors and journal editors made it more likely that studies with negative estimates will be published. However, without strong assumptions, it is impossible to rule out an alternative interpretation that peer review and publication lead to more evidence of negative estimates because the true effect is negative. In addition, meta-analyses do not assign more weight to the most compelling evidence. Indeed, they often downweight less precise estimates, even though the lower precision may be attributable to more compelling research strategies that ask more of the data. In short, meta-analysis is no substitute for critical evaluation of alternative studies. A second strand of recent research that I haven't read all of this clearly, so I'm taking an advantage to do this, okay? A second strand of recent research that conflicts with earlier conclusions argues that geography matters. In other words, the only valid conclusions come from studies that compare changes among close or contiguous states or sub-areas of states. For example, Dube, Lester, and Reich 2010, the name of a study, the authors. A number of studies using narrow geographic comparisons find employment effects that are closer to zero and not statistically significant for both teenagers and restaurant workers. The studies argue that their results differ because comparisons between distant states confound actual minimum wage effects with other associated negative shocks to low-skill labor markets. Do you understand what they're talking about here? When they talk about picking important placebos kind of for things to study?
Yeah. Picking certain cities to measure is really, really important.
Yeah. So, like, let's say somebody raises the minimum wage and they do that in response to some kind of, like, lower class problem. Well, you might see unemployment increase because of that lower class problem that spurred on the minimum wage increase, right? That you have to make sure that you're comparing the right places so that you can find out what's actually causing, right, the unemployment increase.
Yeah.
Some follow-up studies, however, suggest that limiting comparisons to geographically proximate areas generates misleading evidence of no job loss effects from minimum wages. Pointing to evidence that minimum wage tends to be raised when labor markets are tight, this research suggests that, among nearby states that are similar in other respects, minimum wage increases are more likely to be associated with positive shocks, obscuring the actual negative effects of minimum wages. Oh, so this is kind of what I was just talking about. Using better methods to pick appropriate comparison states, this research finds negative elasticities in the range of 0.1 to negative 0.2 for teenagers, and smaller elasticities for restaurant workers. See Newmark, Salas, and Washer, 2014. Blah, blah, blah. Other analyses that try to choose valid geographic comparisons estimate employment responses from as low as 0 to as high as negative 0.5. Basquiat and Rubenstein, blah, blah, blah. Some new strategies and recent studies have also found stronger evidence of job loss for low-skilled workers. For example, Clemens and Wither compared job changes within states between workers who received federal minimum wage increases because of lower state minimums and others whose wages were low but not low enough to be directly affected. Muir and West found longer-term dynamic effects of minimum wages on job growth. They suggest that these longer-term effects arise because new firms are more able to choose labor-saving technology after a minimum wage increases than existing firms whose capital was baked in. So this is just saying that, like, if you increase the minimum wage, it's possible for a new company to come in and take advantage of it, whereas if some company has a business model that already assumes a certain wage, that it might be harder for them to change it up, right?
Yeah, I understand.
Okay. How do we summarize this evidence? Many studies over the years find that higher minimum wage reduces employment in teens and low-skilled workers more generally. Recent exceptions that find no unemployment effects typically use a particular version of estimation methods with close geographic controls that may obscure job losses. Recent research using a wider variety of methods to address the problem of comparison states tends to confirm earlier findings of job loss. Coupled with critiques of the methods that generate little evidence of job loss, the overall body of recent evidence suggests that the most credible conclusion is a higher minimum wage results in some job loss for the least skilled workers, with possibly larger adverse effects than earlier research suggested. So this is only one meta-analysis, right? And I'm sure you can find others that conflict, but basically the summary so far is that even modest increases, right? We're not even talking 15 an hour right now. We're talking about modest increases in state minimum wages probably have disproportionate impacts on the lowest skilled labor markets, right? Now, this isn't even getting into what would a 15 an hour minimum wage do in some areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just things to think about.
Yeah, I'm not entirely. I would probably be more in favor of looking at each state and determining their their cost of living and other things, because probably places like Kansas don't really necessarily need a 15 an hour, but you can't pick and choose which state gets which minimum wage, because that's apparently unconstitutional. Because that's
Wait, how is that not constitutional? There are state minimum wages.
Aren't you? Well, no. I meant like the federal government choosing which state's minimum wage is which. And not like the
I don't
state
know
letting...
if the federal government can do that or not. I'm not sure if it's within their power to do that. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not, but if it isn't, well, yeah, the states can choose their own minimum wage, but
Yeah.
I don't think.
But
yeah.
this is kind of this is why I'm against that one size fits all. That's why I really hated the Bernie 15 an hour minimum wage across the country. Like, I think that from what I've seen, and I haven't read all the literature. I'm not a PhD in economics. I don't have any degree or any formal study on this. So it's possible that there might be somebody with a more robust knowledge of the literature might step in and contradict me. But from what I've seen, empirically speaking, it seems that increasing the minimum wage does lead to negative impacts on the lowest skill workers. That seems to be a statement I'm pretty comfortable with. And if you have different analyses, and I've seen different studies, this is just the one I'm going with right now, but if you've got different analyses empirically that disagree with me, I would be interested in seeing them. But if that is true, right, if we operate under that assumption that that even modest increases in minimum wage can hurt job markets, then a 15 an hour minimum wage across the board would probably be disastrous, is where I stand on that. That's why I'm against the 15 an hour minimum wage.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that's like completely a ludicrous kind of thing. I obviously see where you're coming from, and
Yeah.
The minimum wage thing. There are a lot of studies saying this and that, and it's not really like choose your own facts kind of thing. We would kind of just have to see what would happen if we were to put a 15 hour. Like we have like some prediction of what would happen, but we don't know the absolute what exactly would happen everywhere, kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. But knowing, like, we do have some economic theory, and knowing, like how markets and whatnot work, like an increase in the minimum wage from like $8 an hour to 15 that's a massive jump. Like, it would be really hard to imagine a world where a market just absorbs that massive increase in cost of labor without any negative impacts. Like, that's a huge.
I mean, they would have time to adjust because Bernie didn't want to. Well, I mean, they would have some time to adjust. I don't know if, obviously some markets would adapt slower, but, because he wanted to do it like $2 every year over his 4-term presidency. So
Well, yeah,
like
sure. But like, even if
yeah.
you did it over the course of like 5 years, that's still like a doubling of your wage in 5 years. That's still like a massive increase in wage, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So yeah, that's just kind of my stance on it. Like, I think it sounds good in theory, but I mean, I don't know empirically like how it will play out. Is kind of my thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't really have like a playground to test this, $15 an hour theory on exactly.
Yeah. So that's where I stand.
Okay. Yeah, I only disagree with you on like 2 or 3 things, and for the rest, I mostly just regurgitate your opinion everywhere, all over Reddit.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, buddy, I love you.
All right. Yeah, I love you too.
Have fun. Stay safe. Reparino, cappuccino,
Yeah.
puppuccino, my dude.
Yeah. See ya.
See you later.
Thanks for the debate.
Yep.
Bye.